I've decided to renounce everything and dedicate myself to serving God, to atone for all my sins. I'm entering a monastery. And before I tell you how it happened, subscribe to the channel and click the bell. We have new stories every day. Like and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. My mind scrambled to catch up with the brutal reality. Just hours earlier, it had all been a whirlwind of manufactured concern. "Mom, you're looking tired," Brenda had said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that always set my teeth on edge. "We've booked a surprise for you. A little wellness retreat. Just for a few days. To recharge." Mark had chimed in, his eyes avoiding mine. "You deserve it, Mom. You've done so much for us, for Leo. Let us take care of you for a change." Leo, my grandson. The thought of his bright, 8-year-old face was a sharp pang of grief. They'd used him, of course. They'd told me Leo was having a sleepover at a friend's house, a special treat. I'd packed his little dinosaur backpack myself. The wellness retreat was a pristine, sterile facility with pastel walls and the lingering scent of bleach and despair. They called it Golden Years Assisted Living. A nurse with a plastic smile tried to take the small overnight bag Brenda had packed for me. It contained a nightgown, a romance novel I'd already read, and a tube of toothpaste. Nothing else. No phone, no wallet. Just the essentials to get you settled in, Brenda had chirped, already backing out of the room. "We'll bring the rest of your things tomorrow. We love you, Mom." The door had closed with a soft, bloodless swoosh. That was when the fog of their reassurances evaporated, leaving behind the bitter cold of betrayal. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I, a retired history teacher who had spent her life understanding cause and effect, strategy and consequence, felt a switch flip inside me. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a coup. It took me 4 hours to get out. I observed the staff's shift changes, noted the keypad code the evening janitor used on a side door, a simple 1-9-7-5, the year the facility was built, a detail I'd gleaned from a plaque in the lobby, and feigned a dizzy spell to be left alone in my room. Then I walked. I slipped out into the chilly night air and just kept walking until the manicured lawns of Golden Years gave way to the indifferent sprawl of the suburbs. I had nothing but the clothes on my back and a fury so pure it felt like a heat source in my gut. I couldn't go to my friends. Not yet. What would I say? That my own son had discarded me like a piece of broken furniture? The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on my shoulders, making it hard to breathe. Mark and Brenda had been sowing the seeds for months. "Mom's getting a little forgetful," they'd tell neighbors. "She almost left the stove on again," they'd mention to my book club friends. Lies. All of them. Calculated, insidious little drops of poison meant to discredit me, to paint me as an incompetent old woman who needed to be cared for. And I, lost in the grief of my husband's passing 2 years prior, had been too numb to see the web they were spinning. For days, I was a ghost. I slept on a bench in a small, quiet park. I washed in public restrooms. I ate what little I could buy with the $20 bill I'd found tucked in my coat pocket. I was invisible. A gray-haired woman talking to herself was not an anomaly. It was part of the urban landscape, easily ignored. The fury cooled into a deep, desolate despair. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was losing my mind. Maybe this was all I deserved. The self-blame was a cancer, eating away at what little strength I had left. On the 5th day, hollowed out and shivering, I found myself outside the imposing stone walls of the St. Jude Monastery, a place I'd only ever driven past. It was a place of silence and sanctuary, a retreat from the world. A retreat was what I needed. Not the one Brenda had planned, but a real one. An escape from myself. I rang the bell, my hand trembling. The woman who answered was Sister Agnes. Her face, etched with the fine lines of a life lived in contemplation, was the first kind face I had seen in what felt like a lifetime. I don't know what she saw in my ravaged expression, but she didn't turn me away. I told her I was a widow adrift, seeking peace. It wasn't a lie. I was a widow twice over, widowed by death and widowed by the living. They took me in. They gave me a simple cot in a small, whitewashed room, a course will habit, and a new name in practice, Sister Alara. They asked for nothing in return but a willingness to work and a commitment to silence. My days fell into a simple, monastic rhythm: matins at dawn, weeding the vegetable garden, scrubbing floors, lauds, preparing meals, vespers, compline, sleep. The hard physical labor exhausted my body, and the silence quieted the screaming in my head. I scrubbed and weeded and prayed, trying to scour the stain of my failure as a mother from my soul. I had failed. That was the conclusion I came to in the quiet hours of the night. I had raised a son who could do this. I had been too indulgent, too soft. I had given him too much, expected too little. I had handed him the keys to the kingdom and been surprised when he'd locked me out. The monastery was my penance. I would devote what remained of my life to God, a quiet, humble servant, atoning for my sins. The world outside, the house, the life that had been stolen from me, I would let it all go. I would pray for Mark's soul and try to find forgiveness in my heart. For 6 months, I almost succeeded. The sharp edges of my grief began to dull. The self-loathing became a familiar, low-grade ache instead of a searing wound. I spoke only when necessary. I listened to the chant of the sisters, the tolling of the bell, the rustle of wind in the ancient oaks. I was disappearing, bit by bit, into the fabric of the monastery. The change came during confession. It was something I did weekly, a ritual of emptying the same sad, guilt-ridden thoughts before Father Michael, the elderly priest who served the monastery. I knelt in the dark, the scent of old wood and beeswax filling my senses. "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned," I began, the words automatic. I spoke of my pride, of my failure with my son, of the resentment that still festered in my heart despite my prayers. I drove him to it, I whispered, the old, familiar life falling easily from my lips. My neediness, my presence. I was a burden. He did what he thought was best. Father Michael was usually a man of few words, offering simple, scriptural comfort. But this time, he sighed, a weary, rattling sound on the other side of the screen. "My child," he said, his voice raspy with age, "the stories I hear in this box, you carry a heavy burden, but it is not one of your own making. We cannot take responsibility for the free will of others, not even our own children. Self-blame is a vanity that keeps us from seeing the truth." I began to protest, to insist on my culpability, but he cut me off. "You think your pain is unique? Just last month, a man came to me, burdened by guilt. A young man, not much older than your son, I'd wager. He wept in this very spot. Wept with what he called the stress of it all. Do you know what his stress was?" I was silent, captivated. "He had just put his mother into a home under false pretenses," the priest continued, his voice dropping to a low, conversational tone, unaware of the bombshell he was detonating in the quiet of my soul. "Told her it was a temporary vacation. Had a doctor, a friend of his, sign off on some papers questioning her competence. Also, he could sell her house quickly. He was in some kind of debt, you see. Some investment went sour. He needed the money fast, and his mother, a healthy woman by his own admission, was in the way. He sat here and cried, not for his mother, but for the weight of his own deceit." The air in the confessional suddenly felt thick, unbreathable. Every word was a hammer blow, shattering the penitent stupor I had lived in for half a year. A doctor, papers, debt, investment went sour. It wasn't just a story. It was a blueprint. It was my story, told from the other side of the wall. Father Michael went on, mistaking my silence for contemplation. "So you see, Ilara? People commit truly terrible sins. Deception, greed. You are guilty only of loving a son who made a terrible choice. You must not blame yourself. Pray for him, but absolve yourself." But I wasn't listening to his words of comfort anymore. I was hearing the mechanics of the crime. He thought he was giving me solace, helping me release my guilt. But what he had given me was something far more potent. A key. A weapon. An answer. I wasn't a failed mother. I was a victim. I wasn't forgetful or incompetent. I was robbed. And my son wasn't a stressed, overburdened man making a tough choice. He was a thief. A common, pathetic thief in debt. A cold, clean clarity washed over me, flushing out 6 months of self-pity and despair. The warmth of righteous fury, the The heat I had felt on that first night returned, no longer a wild inferno but a controlled, blue flame. The desire for penance vanished, replaced by a thirst for something else entirely. Justice. No, that wasn't the right word. It was too clean, too sterile. What I wanted was retribution. I finished my confession, my voice steady. I accepted his penance, bowed my head, and left the chapel. I walked not to my cot, but to the Mother Superior's office. I stood before her, the rough fabric of the habit suddenly feeling like a costume. "Mother," I said, my voice clear and devoid of the timid humility I had cultivated for so long. "I must thank you for your kindness and for the sanctuary you have given me." She looked at me, her wise old eyes discerning. "You have found the peace you were looking for, my child?" A slow smile touched my lips, the first real smile in over 6 months. It probably looked terrifying. "No, Mother Superior," I replied. "I haven't found peace. I've found a purpose." The next morning, I traded the gray habit for a set of donated clothes, sensible trousers, a blouse, and a worn but clean coat. I walked out of the monastery gates, leaving Sister Alara behind. I was Alara Vance again. I had no money, no phone, and no home. But I had something I hadn't possessed when I first arrived at their gates, a plan. The days of praying for my son's soul were over. Now, I was going to make him pray he'd never been born. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and click the bell. We have new stories every day. Like and comment what city you're watching from. My first stop was the public library. For a former history teacher, it was a familiar and comforting battleground. The hushed silence, the smell of aging paper and floor wax, the endless rows of information, it was my armory. I sat at a public computer, the fluorescent light humming above me, and began my war. My son, Mark, was a financial advisor. It had always been a point of pride for him, the way he could talk about portfolios and market trends with such confidence. It was also, I now realized, his greatest vulnerability. Men like Mark, who built their lives on an image of success, were terrified of that image cracking. Brenda, with her curated social media presence and obsession with appearances, was just as fragile. Their life was a house of cards, and I was about to become a hurricane. First, I needed an ally. I couldn't fight a legal battle without a lawyer, and I couldn't afford one. I searched for pro bono legal services and elder justice advocates. Page after page of results led me to overwhelmed charities and clinics with months-long waiting lists. It was discouraging, but I was methodical. I refined my search terms. I cross-referenced names. I looked for younger, hungrier lawyers who might be willing to take on a case for the principal and the potential publicity, rather than the fee. That's how I found Sarah Jenkins. Her picture on the small, independent firm's website showed a woman in her late 20s with sharp, intelligent eyes and an impatient set to her jaw. Her bio was short: honors graduate, a stint with the public defender's office, now specializing in advocacy for the vulnerable. It was corporate speak, but beneath it, I sensed a fighter. I drafted an email. I didn't present myself as a weeping, helpless old woman. I laid out the facts coolly and concisely: the sudden wellness retreat, the confiscated phone and wallet, the suspicious timing, my professional background, and my sound state of mind. I ended it with a simple, direct hook: my son believes he has orchestrated the perfect crime. I have reason to believe he is in significant financial distress, and that this action was not born of concern, but of criminal intent. I am looking for a partner to help me dismantle his life as thoroughly as he has attempted to dismantle mine. While I waited for a reply, I started on phase 2, reconnaissance. I needed a place to operate, a base camp. I had one friend I knew deep down I could trust completely: Margaret. We had taught at the same high school for 30 years. She was prickly, unsentimental, and fiercely loyal. She was also one of the few people Mark and Brenda had failed to alienate, mostly because Margaret found Brenda's phony sweetness so repellent she barely spoke to her. I found her number in an online directory and called her from the library's payphone, my pocketful of scavenged quarters clinking. "Alara? My God, where have you been?" Margaret's voice, a familiar gravelly bark, was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. Mark said you'd gone to some exclusive spa, some silent retreat thing, and didn't want to be disturbed. I thought it sounded like nonsense. Brenda's a liar and Mark's a spineless wonder. In that moment, I could have wept with relief. They hadn't fooled everyone. I told her a heavily edited version of the truth, leaving out the park bench and the monastery. I just said I'd been away, sorting things out, and that Mark's story was a complete fabrication. Maggie, I said, my voice tight. I need a place to stay. And I need to borrow your computer. My guest room is yours, she said without a moment's hesitation. Get over here. And Alara? Welcome back. It's time to raise some hell. Staying with Margaret was like plugging into a power source. Her small, cluttered home became my war room. While she bustled around, making pot after pot of strong, black coffee and muttering about Mark's audacity, I got to work on her laptop. An email was waiting for me. It was from Sarah Jenkins. It said, simply, your story is compelling. I'm available to meet tomorrow at 10 a.m. No charge for the initial consultation. Come prepared to be grilled. I was prepared. I spent the rest of the night compiling a timeline of events, noting every lie, every manipulated conversation, every instance of them trying to isolate me. I wrote it all down, my history teacher's brain creating a clear, evidence-based narrative of my own betrayal. The next morning, Sarah Jenkins was even more formidable in person. Her office was a tiny, cramped space overflowing with files, but she moved through it with a sharp, focused energy. She didn't offer me coffee or sympathy. She just pointed to a chair and said, talk. I did. For an hour, I laid out my case. I told her about the forgetfulness narrative, the power of attorney documents I vaguely remembered Mark asking me to sign weeks before, saying they were just formalities for the estate, in case anything happens. I told her about Father Michael's confession. Without breaking the seal of the confessional, I framed it as a hypothetical scenario presented by a source that mirrored my situation with uncanny accuracy, right down to the failed investment. Sarah listened, her face unreadable. She steepled her fingers, her sharp eyes boring into me. She was testing my credibility, looking for cracks, for hints of the confused old woman my son claimed I was. I met her gaze without flinching. Finally, she leaned back. Okay, she said. I believe you. Which means your son has likely committed multiple felonies, including fraud and unlawful imprisonment. But believing you and proving it are two different universes. What do you need? I asked. Proof of competence. Get a full psychiatric evaluation from a reputable doctor. We need a baseline to counter their claims. Proof of motive. You mentioned a failed investment. Any idea what it was? And we need to invalidate that power of attorney. If we can prove you were misled or that he forged it, their entire case crumbles. The work began in earnest. The psychiatric evaluation was humiliating, but necessary. A kind but thorough doctor put me through hours of cognitive tests. The result was unequivocal. I was not just competent, my cognitive function was well above average for my age. One down. Finding the motive was harder. Mark was careful, but Brenda was not. Her social media was a gallery of vanities. Pictures of new cars, lavish dinners, a trip to the Bahamas 6 months ago. Margaret and I scrolled through her profiles, a bitter taste in our mouths. And then we found it. Tucked away in a post from 8 months back was a photo of Mark and another man, clinking champagne glasses. Brenda had tagged the man, Chad Morris. The caption read, celebrating a new venture. So proud of my brilliant husband Mark, partnering with the visionary Chad Morris on the new Azure Horizon Ecolodge project. The future is green. Hashtag mogul, hashtag investment, hashtag making moves. A quick search for Chad Morris and Azure Horizon Ecolodge opened the floodgates. It was a classic scam. A slick website promising a luxury sustainable resort in Costa Rica, soliciting millions from private investors. And then, 3 months ago, the entire thing had collapsed. The website was gone. Chad Morris had vanished. News articles called it a sophisticated Ponzi scheme. Investors were ruined. That's it, I whispered, staring at the screen. Mark's picture, grinning foolishly with a con man, was the proof. He hadn't just made a bad investment. He had likely poured everything into it. Maybe even clients' money. And my house, free and clear, worth nearly $1 million, was his lifeline. Sarah was ecstatic. "This is the motive. This is everything," she said over the phone. "It shows desperation. We can subpoena his financial records. He'll fight it, but with this as a predicate, a judge will grant it." Now, about that power of attorney. This was the final, crucial piece. I remembered signing a sheaf of papers. Mark had rushed me, saying they were just updates to my will. My hand had been sore that day from gardening. My signature was likely shakier than usual. Could he have forged it? Sarah asked. "It's possible," I admitted. "Or he slipped it into a pile of other papers. We need the original document. We'll file our initial complaint. That will force him to produce it during discovery. Then we hire a handwriting expert." The first letter from Sarah's office to Mark was a polite but firm notice of legal action, requesting the immediate restoration of my property and rights. Mark's response was a phone call, not to Sarah, but to me, on Margaret's landline. He must have been furious that I'd found a safe harbor. "Mom? What is this?" he demanded, his voice a strained mix of anger and feigned concern. "You're sick. You're not thinking clearly. This lawyer is taking advantage of you. You need to come home, to the facility. The doctors there can help you." "There is nothing wrong with my mind, Mark," I said, my voice as cold and clear as a winter morning. "But I am curious about the Azure Horizon Ecolodge. Did you enjoy your champagne with Mr. Morris?" The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I had hit him right where it hurt, in his pride, in his secret shame. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered. "You will," I said, and hung up the phone. The first shot had been fired. Mark and Brenda knew I wasn't just a confused old woman anymore. I was an adversary. The game had changed. They retaliated swiftly. A few days later, a thick envelope arrived. It was a petition for conservatorship. They were officially attempting to have me declared legally incompetent, a ward of my son. They attached a statement from a doctor, a Dr. Alastair Finch, claiming I suffered from early-onset dementia and paranoia. The name was familiar. I searched my old address books. Dr. Finch had been Mark's college roommate. They weren't just trying to defend themselves anymore. They were coming on the attack. They were trying to erase me legally, to turn me into a non-person whose claims could be dismissed as the ramblings of a senile mind. I sat at Margaret's kitchen table, the legal papers spread out before me like a declaration of war. The fear was a cold knot in my stomach. They were my own family, and they were trying to destroy me with such vicious, calculated cruelty. But then I looked at the name Dr. Alastair Finch, and the fear was consumed by the fire. They thought they were clever. They thought they had covered all their bases. But they were arrogant. And arrogance always leaves a trail. I picked up the phone and called Sarah. "They've given us a gift," I said. "They've given us a new target." The battle was no longer just for my house. It was for my name, my mind, my very existence. And I was not going to lose. The legal battle became a grim, drawn-out chess match. Mark and Brenda, through their high-priced lawyer, fought us at every turn. They filed motions to delay, motions to dismiss. They painted me as a vengeful, delusional mother, manipulated by an opportunistic lawyer. They used the signed statement from Dr. Alastair Finch as their cornerstone, the objective medical proof of my decline. Sarah was brilliant. She was a bulldog, countering their every move. We had my own, more thorough, psychiatric evaluation, which starkly contradicted Finch's two-paragraph assessment. But it was still a he said, she said of medical opinions. We needed to discredit Dr. Finch himself. A doctor who fakes a diagnosis for a friend is a doctor who cuts corners elsewhere, I told Sarah, my old research instincts kicking in. His sloppiness is our opportunity. While Sarah handled the legal filings, I returned to my armory, the library. I spent days digging into Dr. Alastair Finch. I looked up his medical license, any disciplinary actions, patient reviews, anything. For weeks, it was a dead end. He seemed to have a clean, if unremarkable, career as a general practitioner. But I couldn't let it go. Arrogance leaves a trail. Then I found it. Not on a medical board website, but on a local news outlet's archive from 4 years ago. The headline was small: "Local doctor cleared in malpractice suit." The article detailed how Dr. Finch had been sued by the family of a deceased patient who claimed he'd missed a clear diagnosis. Finch had won the case, arguing the patient had failed to disclose a pre-existing condition. The key witness in his favor had been a nurse who worked at his clinic. The name of the nurse was quoted in the article: Brenda Vance. My daughter-in-law. My blood ran cold. Brenda had been a receptionist at a dental office when she met Mark. I had no idea she had ever worked in the medical field. A little more digging revealed she'd worked as a nurse's aide at Finch's clinic for just under a year, leaving right after the lawsuit was settled. This wasn't just a case of a doctor doing a favor for a college buddy. This was a conspiracy of mutual backscratching. Brenda had likely lied on the stand to save Finch's career 4 years ago, and now Finch was returning the favor by lying to help her steal my house. When I presented the information to Sarah, her eyes lit up with a predator's gleam. "Oh, Ilara," she breathed. "This is a perjury charge waiting to happen. This isn't just a gift, it's the whole Christmas tree." Armed with this new leverage, Sarah filed a motion to depose Dr. Finch and, crucially, Brenda. Their lawyer fought it tooth and nail, but the connection was too explicit for the judge to ignore. The depositions were scheduled. Before the depositions, however, they tried a new tactic: emotional blackmail. Brenda called Margaret's house, sobbing. "Ilara, please," she wept into the phone. "You have to stop this. Think of Leo. What will this do to him? Seeing his grandmother trying to ruin his father? He misses you. He asks about you every day." "Then let me see him," I said, my voice ice. "We can't. Not when you're like this. Not when you're so angry and confused. Drop this lawsuit. We can talk, we can work it out. We can be a family again." It was the most disgusting performance I had ever witnessed. She was dangling my grandson in front of me like a lure. The longing to see Leo was a physical ache, a gaping wound in my heart. But I knew what she was doing. They were scared. The depositions were a threat, and they were looking for a way out. "There is no family to go back to, Brenda," I said quietly. "You and Mark destroyed it when you left me in that room. The only conversation we'll be having is with our lawyers present. Goodbye." I hung up, my hand shaking. That was the hardest thing I had ever done. For a moment, I hated myself for it. But Margaret put a hand on my shoulder. "That was a snake, not a daughter," she said. "You did the right thing." The deposition of Dr. Finch was a masterclass in controlled demolition by Sarah. He was smug and confident at first, reiterating his professional opinion about my obvious cognitive decline. Sarah let him talk, leading him gently down the path of his own arrogance. Then she brought up the malpractice suit from 4 years ago. Finch's face paled. He grew defensive, dismissive. Then Sarah dropped the bomb. "Dr. Finch, is it not true that the key witness who testified in your defense in that case was a Ms. Brenda Schaefer, who now goes by the name Brenda Vance, the wife of the man for whom you have provided this medical opinion?" The doctor looked like he'd been punched in the gut. He stammered. He backpedaled. He conferred with his lawyer. The entire deposition fell apart. He was exposed as a biased, compromised witness. His expert opinion was now worthless. Next was Brenda. She was visibly rattled from the moment she walked in. She tried to play the part of the concerned, grieving daughter-in-law, but her story unraveled under Sarah's relentless, precise questioning. When Sarah brought up her past employment with Dr. Finch and the malpractice suit, Brenda crumbled. She couldn't keep her lies straight. She claimed she barely knew the doctor, then had to admit she'd worked for him. She claimed it was a coincidence, that she hadn't spoken to him in years, a lie that was easily disproven. By the end, she was a wreck. The illusion of the perfect, caring wife was shattered, revealing the greedy, desperate woman underneath. With their star witness discredited and their own lies exposed, Mark's case was in tatters. Their lawyer advised them to settle. His first offer was insulting. I could have the house back, but I would have to agree to the conservatorship, with the house placed in a trust managed by a neutral third party. In essence, I would be a tenant in my own home, with my son still controlling my life from a distance. Tell him to go to hell, I told Sarah. We countered. We wanted the house, a full and public retraction of the conservatorship petition, and reimbursement for all my legal fees. Furthermore, we wanted Mark to return the $20,000 he had borrowed from my savings account 2 days after he'd locked me out, a theft Sarah had uncovered when we finally subpoenaed my bank records. They were backed into a corner. They knew if this went to court, they wouldn't just lose the house. With the evidence of the fraudulent medical report and the financial theft, Mark and Brenda could face criminal charges. Mark's career would be over. Their precious social standing would be annihilated. He called me one last time. Not angry, not pleading, but hollowed out. Defeated. You've won, Mom, he said, his voice flat. They'll sign the papers. There was a long pause. I waited for an apology, an explanation, a sliver of remorse. It never came. I just want to know why, Mark, I finally asked, the question that had haunted me for months. Why? He sighed, a long, weary sound. You wouldn't understand, he said. The pressure, the debt from the Azure project was one thing, but there was more. I made other mistakes. Bad investments with client money. I was trying to fix it before anyone found out. I was going to pay it all back. The house, it was the only way. It was just a house. Just a house. 34 years of my life. The place I brought him home from the hospital, the place my husband took his last breath. Just a house. In that moment, I realized I was not mourning the son I had lost, because the son I thought I had raised had never truly existed. He had been a phantom, an idea I had built in my own mind. The real Mark was this man on the phone a weak, entitled stranger who saw his own mother as an obstacle and her life's work as a cash machine. I understand perfectly, Mark, I said. And for the first time, I felt a kind of peace. Not forgiveness, but closure. You will sign the papers. You will return the money. You will stay out of my life. And you will never, ever mention Leo to me again. If I am to see my grandson, it will be on my terms, and without your poison anywhere near him. I hung up before he could reply. A week later, I walked back into my house. It felt strange, altered. Brenda had already bought new, soulless gray furniture. Hideous abstract art hung on the walls where my family photos used to be. The whole place smelled faintly of her cloying perfume. It was an occupation, and I was liberating it. I spent the first day packing every trace of them into boxes and piling them on the front lawn with a sign that said, "Free." I opened all the windows, letting the fresh air chase out the scent of their treachery. I put my old photos back on the mantelpiece. The next few weeks were a blur of reclaiming my life. Margaret helped me move my old furniture back from storage. Sarah handled the final legal details. The retraction was filed. The money appeared back in my account. It was over. I had won. But victory felt quiet, not triumphant. The revenge was complete, but it didn't fill the hole they had left. One afternoon, sitting in my newly reclaimed garden, I realized that the point wasn't the revenge. The monastery hadn't given me peace, and the lawsuit hadn't brought me joy. Both, in their own way, had simply been tools. Tools to get me back to myself. The fight hadn't been against Mark, it had been for Alara. 2 months after I moved back in, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find a social worker and, standing behind her, a small boy with my son's eyes and my late husband's colic. Leo. Sarah had arranged it. As part of a separate, quiet negotiation, we had established court-ordered visitations. Mark and Brenda had no grounds to refuse. Leo looked at me, his expression uncertain. He'd been told his grandma was sick. He didn't run to hug me. "Hi, Grandma," he said softly. I knelt down, so we were eye to eye. I didn't cry. I didn't talk about his parents or what had happened. I just smiled. "Hello, my love," I said. "I've missed you more than you can imagine." I was just about to bake some chocolate chip cookies. The kind with the extra big chips. "Do you want to help?" A slow smile spread across his face. "Really?" he asked. "Really," I said, taking his small hand in mine. "Let's go." As we walked into the kitchen, into the heart of my home, I knew that this was the real victory. It wasn't in getting the house back. It was in being here, in this moment, ready to build something new. My revenge on Mark and Brenda wasn't their destruction. It was my survival. It was my refusal to be erased. It was in the sweet, simple act of baking cookies with my grandson, a quiet continuation of life in the face of their calculated death. They had tried to bury me, but they didn't know I was a seed. The days that followed were a quiet testament to a life being painstakingly rebuilt. The visits with Leo were the sturdy tent poles around which I erected my new normal. Twice a week, the social worker, a kind but formal woman named Mrs. Gable, would bring him to my door, and for 3 hours, the house would be filled with the sound of a child's laughter again. We baked. We read stories in the big armchair in the living room, the one his grandfather had always loved. We worked in the garden, his small hands patting the soil around the new tomato plants. During these hours, there was an unspoken agreement. He did not speak of his parents, and I did not ask. But I saw the shadows in his eyes. I noticed how he would sometimes flinch at a sudden noise, or how he would fall quiet in the middle of a game, his gaze distant. They were poisoning him, even in their absence. Their stress, their anger, their failure, it was seeping into him, a silent contagion. I knew my fight wasn't truly over. I hadn't just won a house. I had inherited a fragile piece that needed constant, vigilant protection. The first tangible sign of this was my own behavior. I, who had never locked my doors during the day, now had a state-of-the-art security system installed, complete with cameras covering every entrance. I found myself watching the street from my window, my body tensing at any unfamiliar car that slowed down. I was no longer the trusting, slightly naive woman I had been. The monastery had offered me a sanctuary of the soul, but the world had taught me the necessity of a fortress. Margaret called it paranoia. I called it education. The enemy, it turned out, was not hiding. About a month into my new life, Brenda appeared. Not at my door, but at the grocery store. I was examining a carton of eggs when I felt a presence beside me. The cloying scent of her perfume reached me first. She looked ravaged. Her expensive clothes were rumpled, her perfect blonde hair was dull and lifeless, and dark circles bruised the skin under her eyes. She had lost the polished veneer that had been her entire identity. "We need to talk," she said, her voice a low, desperate hiss. "We have nothing to talk about, Brenda," I said, placing the eggs in my cart and starting to move away. She grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "He's going to lose everything, Alara. His license, his career, everything. The clients he borrowed from, they're getting organized. They're talking to a lawyer. We have nothing left. We're living in a one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat." She said the last part as if it were a death sentence. "That sounds like a problem for Mark to solve," I said, prying her fingers from my coat sleeve. "You could fix this," she insisted, her voice rising in pitch, drawing stares from other shoppers. "You have the house. You could take out a loan, give him the money to pay them back. It's the least you could do. You're his mother." The audacity of it was breathtaking. It was like an arsonist asking for a match. I stopped and looked at her, truly looked at her. I felt no pity. Only a cold, clinical disgust. "My duties as his mother ended the moment he put me in that facility," I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of a final judgment. "Every problem you and Mark have now, you earned. You built that life of lies together, and now you can live in its ruins together. Stay away from me. And stay away from my house." I walked away, my heart hammering not with fear, but with a renewed sense of resolve. They were drowning, and they would try to pull me and Leo under with them. Brenda's desperate plea was only the prelude. The main act arrived a week later, on a Tuesday afternoon just after Leo's visit. Mrs. Gable had just picked him up when Mark's car screeched to a halt at my curb. He got out and stormed up the walkway. He was thin, gaunt, his face a mask of unshaven, gray-tinged fury. This wasn't the confident, smooth-talking son I remembered. This was a cornered animal. I locked the deadbolt and spoke through the closed door. "You are not welcome here, Mark. Leave now, or I will call the police." "Let me in, Mom," he shouted, rattling the doorknob. "I just need to talk to you. You have to help me. You can't let this happen." "I can, and I will," I called back, my hand already dialing 911 on my cell phone. "You did this to me," he roared, his voice cracking with a terrifying blend of rage and self-pity. Everything was fine. I had a plan. I was going to fix it all. But you couldn't just accept help, could you? You couldn't just be grateful for the nice place we found you. You had to fight back. You had to ruin everything. For what? For this stupid house? His words confirmed the last, ugly truth in my heart. He felt no remorse. He was not sorry for what he had done, only that he had been caught. He didn't see me as his mother, as a person he had grievously wronged. He saw me as a malfunctioning cog in the machine of his life. I spoke calmly into the phone, giving the dispatcher my address, telling her my estranged son was trying to break into my home. Through the door, I heard Mark's shouting dissolve into a string of curses, followed by a sickening thud as he kicked the solid oak. Then another. He was trying to break it down. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through me. But the fury was stronger. This was my home. He would not violate it again. I stood my ground, phone in hand, listening to the wood splintering, my knuckles white. Within minutes, the sound of sirens sliced through the air. Mark gave the door one last, desperate kick, then I heard his footsteps pounding down the walkway as he scrambled back to his car and sped off. The police arrived a moment later. They were professional, kind. They took a report, noted the damage to the door, and put out a notice for Mark's vehicle. A restraining order, they said, was the next logical step. That night, sleep was impossible. I sat in the dark living room, looking at the cracked and splintered wood of my front door. It wasn't just a house. It was a symbol of my life, my safety, my independence. And he had tried to smash through it as carelessly as he had tried to smash through my life. His desperation was escalating. He was becoming unhinged, dangerous. What would he do next? Show up at Leo's school? Try to follow me? Brenda had used Leo as bait. Mark, in his current state, might see him as a hostage. The thought galvanized me. I was a history teacher. I knew that wars are not won by defense alone. You cannot simply build walls and hope the enemy goes away. Sometimes, you have to dismantle their ability to wage war altogether. I walked into my study and sat down at the desk. I thought back to Mark's last phone call, the one where he had confessed. The pressure, the debt from the Azure project was one thing, but there was more. I made other mistakes. Bad investments with client money. I was trying to fix it before anyone found out. That was his crime. Not the filial betrayal, not the cruelty, but the cold, hard felony that could be proven in a court of law. It was the information I had held in reserve, the final weapon in my arsenal. I had thought my victory was enough. I had thought reclaiming my life and my grandson was the end of it. I was wrong. My survival and Leo's depended on Mark's absolute and total neutralization. He had to be put in a place where he could no longer harm anyone. My hands were steady as I opened my laptop. It didn't take long to find the website for the Securities and Exchange Commission, the federal agency that prosecutes financial crimes. They had a submit a tip form, an anonymous portal for whistleblowers. I began to type. I didn't write as a mother. I wrote as a concerned, anonymous citizen. I laid out the facts as I knew them. The collapse of the Azure Horizon Ecolodge project. The involvement of Chad Morris. The subsequent, extreme financial desperation of Mark Vance, financial advisor. I quoted his own words, his admission of using client money to cover his losses. I suggested they look into the accounts of his elderly clients first, the ones who might not notice a temporary dip in their portfolio. I provided his work address and his license number. I was methodical, precise, and ruthless. I gave them a detailed map that would lead them directly to the heart of his criminal enterprise. When I was finished, I read it over once. It was a death sentence for his career, for his freedom. It was the final, irreversible act of payback. It was not born of anger, not anymore. The fury had burned away, leaving behind a cold, hard necessity. It felt like signing a treaty at the end of a long and bloody war. It was an act of profound sadness and profound relief. I hovered the cursor over the submit button. The face of the little boy I had raised flashed in my mind, the boy with the scraped knee, the boy who aced his math tests, the boy who promised to always take care of me. That boy was gone. In his place was a monster of his own making, a man who had kicked in his own front door. I clicked the button. A month later, Margaret slid the morning paper across my kitchen table. There, on the front page of the business section, was a small but prominent article. Local financial advisor arrested in fraud scheme. There was a picture of Mark, a terrible, grainy photo of him being led from his office building in handcuffs. He looked surprised, indignant, like a man who couldn't believe the rules applied to him. Brenda was nowhere in sight. The article mentioned he was being held without bail, a flight risk, facing a dozen counts of wire fraud and embezzlement. It was estimated he had stolen over $2 million from his clients. I read the article from beginning to end, my coffee growing cold. I felt no surge of triumph, no vindictive glee. I just felt quiet. The noise that had been in my head for nearly a year had finally stopped. The threat was gone. The war was over. A year after that, I sat in the pews of the chapel at St. Jude Monastery. It was a bright autumn day, and the stained glass windows threw jewels of light across the stone floor. I wasn't there for confession. I was just visiting. After the service, I found Father Michael sitting in the garden, his old hands resting on his knees. He recognized me, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Elara," he said, his voice the same gravelly whisper. "It is good to see you. You look stronger." "I feel it," I said, sitting on the bench beside him. "I wanted to thank you, Father." He looked confused. "For what, my child?" "For a story you once told me in confession," I said. "About a man burdened by guilt. You used it to try and absolve me of my own self-blame. It didn't absolve me. It armed me. You showed me the truth, and it set me free. Just not in the way you intended." A slow understanding dawned on his face. He nodded, a long, thoughtful motion. "Ah," he said. "God's work is often done in ways we do not expect. The truth is a powerful weapon indeed. I pray you have found your peace with it." "I have," I said, and I knew it was true. I drove home. Leo was coming over that afternoon. He was 10 now, a bright, happy boy. He lived with me 4 days a week, a custody arrangement Sarah had helped me secure after Brenda, facing a life of poverty, had a breakdown and moved back in with her parents in another state, surrendering her parental rights. Mark had been sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. I pulled into my driveway and looked at my house. The front door was new, solid, and strong. The garden was flourishing. A pumpkin Leo and I had carved sat on the porch step, its crooked smile seeming to welcome me. This was not the spoils of war. It was a sanctuary. One I had fought for, one I had secured. My revenge was not a single act, but a state of being. It was the sound of Leo's key in the new lock. It was the smell of cookies in the oven. It was the quiet, unbreakable piece of a life I had refused to let anyone take from me. They had kicked me out, cast me aside, and tried to bury me. But my roots were deeper than they could ever imagine. And now, in the safety of the garden I had reclaimed, I was finally, truly free to grow.
So, another story of my grandmother has ended. And be clicking here, you will have when more such stories.